Well, thank you everyone for being here. It's a pleasure to spend time with other Foresight professionals and others who are interested in the field, even if it is, as you say, a little early. So I'm gonna chat for about 20 minutes. But what I want to do is just give a bit of an overview. As Rafael mentioned, I spent a period of time at GBN, Global Business Network, which was one of the pioneers of using scenarios to help organizations think about the future in structured ways. I know you're going to also have the benefit of Peter Schwartz's knowledge. Peter was one of the co-founders and leading lights at GBN, so he'll give you a much more rigorous and kind of his personal take on that. I'll give you what I think, a few of the things that I took away and what I think is of enduring value from what GBN was doing, and how I use that now in my current work as I've evolved and moved into Salesforce over the last few years. So I'm already kind of getting into a little bit. This is a slide I actually created to introduce myself to a new boss a few years ago, but it's just a little bit of a sense of kind of my professional career. So I'm originally from Ireland, studied at ESPAP, the European School of Management, as well as Trinity in Dublin. Then spent about 10 years in consulting, first half with, all of it as part of Monitor Group, which was a strategy consulting company founded by Mike Porter and a bunch of other Harvard folks. They acquired Global Business Network around 2000. And so I was able to, having spent a bunch of time doing globe trotting out of a suitcase and some very perhaps OECD related economic development work in Libya under the Gaddafi regime, which is another story. Then I moved over to GBN in San Francisco in the Bay Area and was exposed to all of this kind of scenario type thinking and really designing strategic conversations, of which scenarios is a subset. And then took that forward into Salesforce, where I've been since 2013. I spent the first half of my time there actually not working on scenarios, more in the area of innovation with customers. And then around COVID time, actually started to work on futures again. Peter Schwartz, who I had moved to San Francisco to work with at Global Business Network, has been at Salesforce also since about 2011. And Peter and I started working together on COVID scenarios in early 2020. Before we were really calling it COVID, it was just this virus in China. And over the following kind of year, we built out a series of different COVID scenario work as we were learning more about the dynamics of the disease, and then went on from there to do a range of additional work on sustainability, on macro questions like the future of inflation. And then in the last couple of years, we've really focused mostly on AI, which is obviously the most dramatic change and dynamic shaping the technology industry. So I'll try and kind of cover a little bit of kind of GBN, as I mentioned, what I learned there, and then also get into kind of Salesforce. So 2 chapters really to the presentation. I've grabbed a few slides. I went back into my archives and kind of grabbed a few slides. This is a classic. If anyone probably sat through a GBN presentation at some point in the past, there was a great story about how early explorers to the west coast of the United States thought that California was an island and sent back this message. They went into Puget Sound at the top and up from Baja California at the bottom, and kind of assumed that the 2 bodies of water met. Of course, they didn't, but it took a very long time for the maps to update. I actually have an original copy of one of these maps on the wall here behind me, which I was gifted by Peter. But it's a great story which just talks about the enduring nature of mental models. And when we're thinking about the future, really the starting point of what I took away from my learning at GBN, my time at GBN, was the mental models that we have about the future, about how things work, about how things should work, are so strong. And really that's the core task of what we do in Foresight work, is to try and get people to stretch and break and evolve the mental models that they have. Shell was a huge influence on GBN and the thinking of Pierre Vac. For people who aren't aware of the context, basically, the mental model in the oil industry was that oil prices would stay low as they had done forever. And Pierre Vac was, came in from a very interesting, diverse background. A guy who was interested in all kinds of Eastern, thinking, and spent time in Japan, spent time in India, had spent a lot of time with Gurdjieff. Very, very interesting person. And he could see something different that other people couldn't. He could see the demographic changes. He could see the political changes. He could see the coming of things like OPEC. And as a result, he was able to help position Shell for that. But what he also evolved his thinking from saying is, yes, I've got to understand this macrocosm out there in the world, but the microcosm of the heads of the decision makers is really important. That's actually what you need to change. It does no good to say, hey, we predicted that, or in 3 years' time to look back and say that was a scenario that we were thinking of, unless you've actually managed to make the decision makers that you're trying to influence change their way of thinking about the world. And so that, as a now an internal foresight function within a company, that gives you the opportunity to go really deep on who are the decision makers I'm trying to influence. So, as a consultant, you can do this somewhat, but when you're working inside an organization, I find that the ability to do what Pierre is talking about here really matters. One obvious, point, and back to the title of the talk and the idea of evolution. This was kind of, when I came in, there was this idea, here's a scenario learning process. We're going to have 4 weeks of breathing in, and then we'll do a 2-day workshop, and then we'll have 6 to 8 weeks of breathing out. Then we'll do another 2-day workshop, and then we'll, develop our strategy. And of course, the pace of the perceived need to operate at a very high pace in today's business world makes processes like these difficult. They probably end up actually being this long just because of the difficulty of scheduling everyone, but the perceived pace is kind of different. And so there's just this, while all of the kind of constituent steps here still make a lot of sense, I think one of the big evolutions is, well, how many people actually need to be involved in all of this? What do people really need to create their own scenarios? And so we can get into that both as I talk about the later work at Salesforce and also perhaps in conversation hour. So this was kind of, when I came to GBN, this was a very typical what a scenario workshop might look like. A bunch of people from different parts of an organization. You see Lynn Carruthers, who was our visual practitioner, and went on to kind of pioneer a lot of that work outside. And, I think we've all been in these types of workshops where we're not just having kind of discussions. There's a bit of front of room, there's a bit of round table. There's also this attempt to visually capture, so nothing particularly remarkable. I always loved this. This was actually something that they commissioned at GBN from an artist in the Bay Area, I think, which was all of the different archetypes of people you would meet in a workshop, right? From the pragmatist, what will this mean on Monday morning, to the cynic, to the contrarian, and the creative enthusiast, who's really, this is their dream to have a workshop like this. Always good to have these kind of ideas in mind as you think about the design process for a workshop, I found. Another kind of key thing that GBN, again, building on Pierre's insight about remarkable people, which came originally from Gurdjieff, was the idea that you need to bring an organization, you need to bring the people that are actually part of the decision process, but you also need to bring others into the conversation, whether that's through interviews or through actually having them participate in a workshop, which is where they can kind of bring not just an expertise, but also a kind of an intellectual flexibility. Steve Weber, I was just chatting with on Friday, was a fantastic kind of super expert, remarkable person that we bring in. And Steve had this fantastic way of framing, well, how could we be wrong here? He would always ask that question, what are we not seeing? And I think that's really crucial for all of us as foresight professionals to think about in our work. I want to make a plea. I was just at the South by Southwest, kindly at the invitation of the Dubai Futures Forum. They helped me participate in a panel there on what makes a futurist. And I tend to find in a certain type of future circle a real desire to kind of get past the 2x2, and the 2x2 is kind of almost becomes a what's the word, a scapegoat, a kind of thing that everyone can point to and say, damn the 2x2. And I just want to remind people that, and I've seen this a lot, the first task of foresight work is to get past the single future, get past the official future, get past the one future. And the thing that a 2x2 very quickly does is force you into 4 different quadrants. And it's not that it's the right process for everyone. It's not that it's, perfect. I think there's a lot of great advances that have been made in the field, but I think there's a kind of a naive kind of, let's just move to inductive futures, which are great, but inductive futures also bring, if not done skillfully, can bring all of our biases to the fore again. So I think, bearing in mind the different ways that we there's lots of different methodologies now, but it's funny. I feel like I'm in a position of defending the 2x2 a little bit now. This is just an example that we used to use about how, you can kind of think about the deep forces that push you in the different directions. And of course, that's 2x2 work done well, right? A couple of kind of reflections on some projects that I worked on. So I was came to GBN in about 2007 as the kind of global financial crisis was starting to brew, and we ended up doing a bunch of work with Aaron and some of his colleagues, and also with other customers around the financial crisis and kind of what was emerging there. And I think this was always, I just love this quote. It was such a classic, mental model, strong mental model description from this guy at AIG. For AIG had to be bailed out to the tune of something like $80 billion, which felt like a lot of money at the time. And he's really, he's saying it's hard to be flippant to see a scenario within any kind of realm of reason that would see us losing even $1. And of course, they lost a lot more than that. But that was fascinating for me. I came from kind of an economics background. And so to do this work and think about, to really see how a very large part of the world economy and the most sophisticated people within the world economy were actually not thinking clearly about what was happening, were prey to the incentives that kind of caused them to see what they were wanted to see in the world economy, and then also just where that would take us. And I think we're in another kind of moment now of macro in the world, and it's very interesting and kind of important for us all to think about what are the blind spots that people are not seeing. Where could this be taking us? Again, we can get into more of the questions. We took some of that work and kind of, this is, probably maybe a cautionary tale about the complexity of scenarios. This was a project we did for one of our corporate customers around that time. But, one of the things they wanted to do 10-year scenarios. And this is kind of an interesting point again. In times of great uncertainty, people come and say, we want to do 10-year scenarios. That's what we've done before. It's going to work. But really, the short term was so uncertain that it was impossible to kind of get into the long-term conversation until we had actually done some work in the short term. So we kind of innovated by creating this two-stage, well, here's some short-term scenarios and here's what might happen as we come out of different versions of those. Again, can get into more detail, but that was a learning for me in the process. GBN, one of the great things about being, having a bit of extra time was just this extraordinary book club. And there is a tremendous literature. I see some folks whose books have probably appear on this list at some point on this call. So, there is a tremendous amount of rich knowledge about how to do this work that has accumulated over time in different books. Some of these books are kind of more about the driving forces. Some of them are about the process of doing this kind of work. But I think there's so much to be gleaned. And so I would encourage people to go back. There's a temptation to think that the news about, if we're thinking about the future, we got to read the latest stuff. And actually, I would make a plea for the classics and going back and thinking about, what people did in the past and how history rhymes over time. Another book that came out of GBN that has been a huge influence on me, my friend Lisa Solomon, who's on the board of the Long Now Foundation with me now, and Chris Ertel, longtime GBN practitioner who went on to run Deloitte's greenhouses after Monitor was acquired by Deloitte. They wrote just a fantastic book, which I recommend to everyone, really about kind of the tradecraft and practice of designing strategic conversations. Two big insights. One is that there's three big types of strategic conversations. You're either building understanding, you're shaping choices, or you're gaining alignment and making decisions. That these things happen in a sequence. You can't do step 3 unless you've done step 2 and step 1 beforehand. And you can only kind of do one of each of these in any one meeting. And so a strategic conversation process involves working through all of this. And then there's kind of details you see here underneath. But it's just a fantastic kind of, I have a copy on my Kindle and I have a copy in paper, and I'm constantly referring to it and thinking about the work that we do. Peter will mention again, but also I recommend a book that not many people have picked up over the years, but it's a short little book called Learnings from the Long View, Building on the Art of the Long View. And Peter, to his credit, still always learning, always willing to reflect on his successes and his mistakes. And so, there's a great section of learning from mistakes in that book, which kind of refers to some of the GBN stuff. So just moving quickly a little bit through Salesforce. This is, we're a small team at Salesforce Futures. This is actually a little bit out of date. Lynn Carruthers, who was a longtime GBN practitioner and dear friend, has actually retired since. But we have a small team. We've built up a lot of folks who are doing other type of work around Salesforce. So again, back to that microcosm, macrocosm, they really understand, the complex corporate structure and kind of culture and decision makers. And so we kind of talk about our mission as helping the company and our customers anticipate, imagine, and shape the future, which kind of corresponds roughly to a 3-phase process, but it's kind of rough. We still talk about a lot of the same stuff. You know, we're trying to get past the official future. We're trying to kind of create, discussability where undiscussability is potentially going to creep in. And in the tech industry, right, where people, particularly a company that's only 25 years old and has been extremely successful in that time, it's really easy to believe that the things that caused us to be successful in the past are going to allow us to be successful in the future. And it's important to bring in a future back and an outside in perspective to complement those, you know, generating scenarios and kind of really this focus on making better, faster decisions today. That's really where we focus, right? This is again in the context of our culture and this pace of the technology industry. That's really the important thing. We have people like Jeff Bezos who say, you know, you need to make decisions when you only have about 70% of the information that you think you need to make the decision. If you wait till you have 95%, then somebody else will have moved faster than you. Only the paranoid survive. And so it's really like, how do you wring as much value out of the information you have while creating a social process that allows people to get together to share the signals and ideas that they see is really what we can do by designing strategic conversations using futures. I'll skip this, but just, you know, Salesforce has a process called the V2MOM, vision, values, methods, obstacles, metrics. As a company, we're very agile. This goes beyond Foresight, but just into kind of how do companies run these days. This process, every year, our whole company goes through a process from the top down of refreshing our annual planning. So this is a couple of years back now, just because, you know, to not disclose things I shouldn't disclose, but this is, as we go back, this is kind of how we were thinking about what futures doing. You know, we make futures, we drive strategic conversation, we improve how we work. You know, it's about the conversation. Ari Hus.